At first glance, it sounds fair. Joint custody. Two words that suggest balance, cooperation, and equality. You hear it and think, okay, at least I won't be cut out of my kid's life. But what most men don't realize is that joint custody doesn't always mean what it sounds like. And by the time they figure that out, it's usually too late to fix. Because in court, words don't mean what you think they do. Joint can still mean one parent has most of the control. Shared doesn't always mean equal. And the system, well, it has its own quiet rules. Ones that leave fathers with every intention of being present, slowly watching their role shrink, their time dissolve, and their influence disappear. It doesn't matter how committed you are, how much you want to be there. If you walk into court thinking the paperwork guarantees fairness, you're already at a disadvantage. Because behind a language of joint custody is a system that often looks equal, but feels anything but. Let's talk about 5 hidden truths men aren't told about joint custody until they're already living with the consequences. He walked out of court thinking he'd won. The paperwork said joint custody, and in his mind, that meant 50-50ths. Equal time, equal say. But 2 months later, he was seeing his kids every other weekend and a dinner on Wednesdays, if nothing got in the way. That's when it hit him. Joint doesn't mean equal, not even close. This is the first trap most fathers walk right into. They hear joint custody and assume it guarantees an even split. But what the legal system doesn't explain clearly is that there are 2 types of custody, legal and physical, and they don't always go hand in hand. You can share legal custody, which means you both have the right to make decisions about your child's life, while still getting only a fraction of the actual time with them. And even when you do have joint physical custody, that doesn't automatically mean it's split 50-50ths. In fact, most joint physical custody agreements still give one parent a majority of the parenting time. And 9 times out of 10, the court leans toward the parent who offers what they call stability. Translation: the one who stayed in the home, the one with the flexible job, the one the judge assumes is the default caregiver. And that person, more often than not, isn't the father. So you walk away thinking you're going to be a full-time dad. But slowly, you realize you're part-time on paper and even less than that in reality. You can't plan vacations. You miss holidays. You're catching up instead of parenting. And by the time you notice how lopsided it really is, changing it is a whole different battle. But the time imbalance is just the beginning. Because even when you do have access, it doesn't always come with authority. He thought having joint custody meant he had a say, that decisions would be made together. But the first time he tried to weigh in on a school transfer, a medical issue, even a simple change in bedtime, he was ignored. And when he pushed back, he was told to talk to the primary parent. That's when he realized having joint custody doesn't mean having control. This is where things get murky. Because while the court might say both parents share legal custody, there's usually one person designated as the primary decision maker, whether officially or unofficially. That parent gets final say in everything from schooling to healthcare to travel. And if you're not the one holding that role, you're left requesting, suggesting, waiting. In theory, joint legal custody means equal input. In practice, it often means one parent drives the bus while the other tries to grab the wheel from the back seat. And when you challenge that dynamic, you're suddenly labeled as combative, difficult, uncooperative. Judges don't like conflict. So even when a father is asking for fairness, it can be twisted into aggression. It doesn't help that the legal system loves structure. One home is typically designated as the primary residence. That becomes the center of gravity, the school district, the mailing address, the hub for all activity. And the parent tied to that address, they usually end up with more power, more time, and more influence. So yes, your name might be on the paperwork, but don't let that fool you. Because when one parent starts making all the decisions and the other is told to just show up, what you've really been given isn't a partnership. It's a visitor's pass. And the reason this happens so easily, it's baked into something even more subtle, something the system rarely admits out loud. He didn't expect the bias, not in writing, not in court, but he felt it every time the judge used phrases like maternal instincts or asked if he'd be able to balance work with parenting. That's when it hit him. The system still assumes mom is the default parent, even when no one says it out loud. This is one of the most overlooked truths in family court. On paper, judges are supposed to remain neutral. They're trained to avoid bias, to evaluate both parents fairly. But beneath the legal language, cultural assumptions still shape outcomes. The quiet belief that mothers are nurturers and fathers are providers lingers in the background of every custody decision. And the impact of that belief is anything but subtle. If a father works full-time, it's seen as a conflict. We have time for the kids. But if the mother works just as much or more, it's seen as dedication, responsibility. If a dad shows emotion in court, he's unstable. If he's calm and measured, he's cold. Meanwhile, mothers are given space to grieve, to struggle, to be human. Even in so-called joint custody agreements, this bias shows up in the fine print. Parenting plans lean heavily toward routines that favor the mother's schedule. School pickups, weekday overnights, doctor appointments, all default to her. The dad gets the weekends, the leftovers. And most men don't fight it. Not because they agree, but because they've been told not to rock the boat. Be agreeable. Be patient. Don't make it worse. But that silence comes at a cost. Because if you don't challenge the quiet bias, it becomes the new normal. The real danger? You think it's just how the system works until you realize it's shaping how your kids see you too. And even if you try to make it work, there's still one more trap waiting. The kind that rewrites the rules on the fly, and almost always in someone else's favor. At first, it felt like a small favor. A last-minute schedule change, a holiday swap, a missed pickup with a promise to make it up later. He said yes, because he didn't want to seem difficult. But slowly, the schedule he fought for started slipping through his fingers. That's the hidden trap. Flexibility always favors one side. On paper, joint custody looks balanced. But life doesn't happen on paper. Kids get sick. School events pop up. Family emergencies happen. And in almost every situation, the parent with more day-to-day control, usually the one listed as the primary residence, gets to rewrite the schedule. Not permanently, not officially, but enough times that it becomes routine. What starts as compromise turns into a pattern. She asks to switch weekends. She keeps the kids a little longer because they have a birthday party. She needs help during the week, but when you ask for a change, suddenly it's inconvenient, or it disrupts the routine. And if you push back, you're no longer seen as cooperative. You're creating conflict. That's the double standard fathers face in joint custody. Be flexible, and you get walked over. Set boundaries, and you're painted as hostile. Judges tend to favor the parent who appears more child-focused. And guess what? The one accommodating last-minute changes tends to look better on the surface. But behind closed doors, many fathers feel like they're being slowly erased. Not by a court order, but by 1,000 tiny compromises that add up to a life lived on the sidelines. And what makes it worse is the fear. The fear that if you say no too often, you'll end up back in court and lose even more. By the time you realize your parenting time is no longer respected, you're stuck defending a schedule that doesn't even exist anymore. And if you think the court will step in to fix it, that brings us to the next hard truth. One that most men never see coming until it's far too late. He thought going back to court would fix it. That if he just explained the situation, how the schedule kept shifting, how decisions were being made without him, the judge would see the imbalance and make it right. But when he filed for a modification, he hit a wall. That's when he learned the final, and possibly most frustrating, truth. Once custody is set, changing it is an uphill battle you're not guaranteed to win. Most fathers don't realize how rigid the system becomes after the initial agreement is signed. The court treats the original order as the status quo, and once that's in place, it takes a major change in circumstances to convince a judge to alter it. And not just any change, something significant, documented, and provable. Emotional strain, unfair reschedules, or lost parenting time. Usually not enough. Even if a father has more time now, a better home, or a more stable routine than he did during the initial hearing, that alone might not be enough. Judges prioritize stability for the child, which ironically often means keeping the existing plan. even if it's unbalanced or outdated. The system resists disruption, even when fairness is on the line. What's worse, trying to modify custody can backfire. If the court feels you're being petty or stirring up conflict, you risk being labeled as disruptive. And that label sticks. It colors every future hearing, every filing, every email that ends up in a court record. That's the trap. You're told the system supports involved fathers. But when you try to be that father, consistently, actively, equally, you find yourself battling not just your co-parent, but the very process that promised to protect your rights. So no, joint custody doesn't always mean what you think it does. Because when the rules are built to look fair, but play out differently, it's not a partnership. It's a performance. And by the time you realize that, you've already lost time you'll never get back. By the time most fathers realize what joint custody really means, the damage is already done. The schedule has slipped. The decisions have been made without them. And the title that sounded fair on paper starts to feel like a mask, something designed to make the outcome look equal, even when it's anything but. Because here's the truth the court doesn't say out loud. Joint custody isn't a guarantee of time, influence, or fairness. It's a framework. And if you don't understand how that framework actually works, how it bends, who it benefits, and what it quietly allows, you'll spend years trying to fix something you thought was already settled. So what can you do? First, stop assuming the system will automatically protect your role as a father. It won't. You have to document everything. You have to advocate early, clearly, and without apology. And most of all, you have to understand that fairness isn't handed out. It's fought for. Because being present isn't just about showing up. It's about being allowed to show up. And when that presence is constantly being chipped away by vague wording, unbalanced routines, and silent bias, you can't afford to be passive. Don't wait until you're on the sidelines wondering what happened. Learn the language. Ask the hard questions. And never mistake the appearance of joint custody for the reality of shared parenting. They are not the same. And knowing the difference could be the one thing that changes everything.